You may have noticed conflicting news and information about increasing the minimum wage. The Fight for 15, championed by Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, states that the economy will be made better off by raising the minimum wage to a living wage. Conversely, President-elect Donald Trump and his appointee to head the Department of Labor, Andrew Puzner, argued that raising the minimum wage is bad for business, will result in businesses shutting down, and overall lower profits. When faced with conflicting information, who should you believe? The answer is, all of them are right. But who you side with depends on your objectives for society, hence an analysis of increasing the minimum wage from both a macro and micro perspective. I have created a mythical economy with two players, small business Bob and corporate Carl. Both are in the lamp manufacturing industry and make identical products. As good businessmen, both of them have employees. Bob employs Luke and Carl employs Laura. Let's start by looking at Bob's economic situation. Bob sells his lamps at the market rate of $32 each. This means that he will receive $32 in revenue for every lamp he sells. Now let's consider Bob's expenses. He pays about $10 in taxes on every lamp he sells, whether that's sales tax, payroll tax, or corporate taxes. He also needs to pay his labor. Luke can make one lamp in an hour, and Bob pays him $8 an hour, so every lamp has an $8 labor cost. Bob also needs to pay for materials such as bases, lampshades, electrical wiring, and whatnot. This accounts for $10 of every lamp that Bob sells. After subtracting his expenses from his revenue, we can see that Bob has a profit of $4 on every lamp sold. That's not a lot of profit, and he'd certainly like to make more. But overall, he's satisfied with the situation. Now let's look at Carl's economic situation. Carl also sells his lamps at the market rate of $32. This means he earns $32 in revenue for every lamp sold. Because Carl owns a large corporation, he also receives income from the government in the form of production credits, export subsidies, rebates, and refunds. Now we need to consider Carl's expenses. Because he's a large company, he can put money in an offshore account or foreign tax haven. This means he doesn't pay any corporate taxes. Like Bob, he needs to pay his labor. Laura can make one lamp in an hour, and Carl pays her $8 an hour, so $8 of every lamp is attributed to Laura's labor cost. Carl also needs to pay for materials, bases, lampstands, electrical wiring, etc. Because Carl is a large corporation, he can get favorable contracts for supplies and benefit from lower prices by buying in bulk. Materials account for $9 of every lamp he sells. After subtracting Carl's expenses from his revenue, he has a profit of $25 on every lamp sold. That may not seem like a lot of profit, and he'd certainly like to make more. He complains about the price of labor and would like to see a political environment that's more favorable towards the business community. This is the basis of the economy and the starting point for all of the analyses that will be completed in this exercise. So what happens if we raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour? Let's start by evaluating small business Bob. His revenue remains the same, as does his cost for taxes and materials. When the price of labor increases from $8 an hour to $15 an hour, his profit of $4 turns into a loss of $3 on every lamp he sells. Now let's examine corporate Carl's situation. Like Bob, his revenue remains the same, as does the amount of taxes and materials. When the price of labor increases from $8 an hour to $15 an hour, his profit of $25 a lamp drops to $18 per lamp. This situation is obviously unsustainable for Bob, and Carl isn't very happy either. Solution 1. Raise prices. Because Bob is no longer profitable, he decides to pass the increase in labor cost on to the consumer in the form of higher prices. The lamp he used to sell for $32, he now sells for $40. This increases the revenue for each of his lamps, and it's going to give him an overall profit of $5 per lamp. This is $1 more than he was making originally. It should be noted that Bob's decision to raise price has no effect on Carl. So, how do consumers respond to Bob's increase in the price of lamps? When faced with identical products with different prices, consumers will choose the lower priced option. This means they will no longer buy Bob's lamps. They will choose Carl's lamps instead. When no one buys products from Bob, he will ultimately go out of business. Clearly, this isn't a very good solution. Solution number 2, lower Bob's taxes. People in business often herald lowering taxes as being business friendly, so let's look at what happens here. Presently, Bob pays $10 in taxes. The money he and others like him pay in taxes is used to cover the production credits and subsidies that Carl receives. By reducing Bob's tax burden in half, from $10 to $5, will have no effect on Carl's profitability. And it results in Bob once again being profitable. However, it's a paltry profit of $2 per lamp. The $5 Bob now pays in taxes no longer covers Carl's subsidies, resulting in deficit spending for the government into the foreseeable future. Solution 2 result, Bob is less profitable. If the profit margin is low enough, he may decide to close his business and get a job working for Carl. Solution 3, eliminate Carl's advantage. Bob's problem wasn't the wage increase. Bob's bigger issue is that Carl has an unfair advantage. Corporate welfare is a term often used to describe giving big benefits to major corporations. In this example, Carl receives income from the government in the form of production credits, export subsidies, rebates, refunds, or what have you, that as a small business owner, Bob simply doesn't get. Also, Carl is able to avoid paying taxes by placing his money in overseas accounts and offshore tax shelters. These are options that simply aren't available for Bob. Bob has to pay his taxes. So let's evaluate what happens when we take away those advantages. Recall that when faced with a higher labor cost, Bob chose to raise the price of his lamps and pass that cost on to the consumer. His expenses remained the same, and he had a $5 profit on every lamp sold rather than the $4 profit he was getting originally. Bob was happy with this outcome. Carl now has to raise revenue and pass cost on to consumers. He no longer receives subsidies from the government and must pay his taxes. His other costs remain unchanged. This gives him a profit of $6. That's still $1 per lamp more than Bob gets, but nothing close to the $25 per lamp profit he had been getting originally. And everyone is asking, aren't higher prices bad for the consumer? Isn't everyone worse off now that lamps cost more? Do you remember Luke and Laura? They are our consumers. Individuals and households who get up every morning and go to work are the very consumers who are now facing the higher prices as a result of the increase in their wages. Originally, Luke and Laura made $8 an hour, and lamps cost $32. This means they had to work 4 hours in order to afford one of the lamps that they produced each day. Now that they make $15 an hour, lamps cost $40. This means they only have to work 2.7 hours a day in order to afford the lamps that they produce. This means that they have money left over for other things, like paying off debt, saving for college, or buying a house. Luke and Laura are better off, even when accounting for the higher price. And raising the minimum wage is good for the economy, too. The gross domestic product, or GDP, is the sum of all goods and services purchased in the economy. If our economy consisted of the lamp market, then at a price of $32, when Luke and Laura each purchase a lamp, the GDP is $64. And if we raise price to $40 and they buy the same number of lamps, the GDP increases to $80. That's 25% growth. And a strong economic growth makes someone else happy too. I'd like you to meet President Paul. Before we did anything in the economy, he received $10 in taxes from Bob, no tax money from Carl, and had to pay Carl $10 in subsidies. This didn't leave him with any money to run the government. After raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour and eliminating Carl's advantage, he still gets $10 in taxes from Bob. He now gets $10 in taxes from Carl as well, and he doesn't have to subsidize Carl. This means that he has $20 to run the government, and that's money he can use to improve infrastructure like roads, bridges, schools, and hospitals. So let's look at the winners and the losers. Small business Bob earns greater profits, Luke and Laura have more money in their paychecks, and President Paul gets to take credit for a growing economy. Corporate Carl earns significantly less profit. To quote my favorite Vulcan, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or the one. Solution 3 result. Carl is less profitable, Bob is more profitable, Luke and Laura have more money, and economic growth makes President Paul happy too. So, policy analysis. Our first option was to do nothing. We could leave the economy as it was, in which Bob had $4 profit and Carl had $25 profit, for a total of $29 profit for businesses in the economy. And we had a GDP of $64. Luke and Laura each earned $8 an hour, and it took 4 hours of work to purchase a lamp. Option 2 was to increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour. The immediate impact of this was to turn Bob's $4 profit into a $3 loss, and we saw Carl's profit decrease to $18 as well, for a total of $15 profit in the economy. The GDP remained unchanged at $64. In order to rectify the damage done to Bob's situation, we employed three solutions. Solution number 1, Bob raises his prices but ultimately went out of business anyway. Any gains that we saw were only viable in the short run. Let's look at solutions 2 and 3. Solution 2 was to lower Bob's taxes. This had no impact on GDP and only marginally increased business profits. Depending on the size of Bob's business, a $2 profit per lamp might not be sustainable, and he might go out of business anyway. Solution 3, to eliminate Carl's advantage, this resulted in an increase in overall prices, but those increases were not enough to impact Luke and Laura, who were still better off. Bob's profits increased by $1 per lamp, and GDP went up too. It significantly reduced Carl's profits, but put more money in the hands of President Paul, who was able to invest that money on infrastructure. So which option is best? Depends on your perspective. Based purely on microeconomic objectives, there is only one thing that matters, and that is how much profit a business can make. Option 1, to do nothing in this situation, is clearly the best. Based only on microeconomics, we can reasonably advocate for increasing business profits. We could advocate for lowering taxes, increasing Carl's subsidies, and even eliminating the minimum wage. All of these things will increase business profits. In microeconomics, we may even advocate for slavery, because if you can get your labor for free, you can increase your profit margin. Conversely, based on macroeconomic perspectives, we would choose to raise the minimum wage and adopt solution 3. That option brings the lowest business profits, but it has the greater overall economic health, highest GDP, and most equal distribution of wealth. From a macro perspective, we care about making the majority of people better off and to see a strong economy. We do not look solely at business profit. In the end, what you choose depends on what your policy objectives are. If your sole goal is corporate profit, you will make choices based on one set of theories. If your goal is economic growth, then you will make a separate choice based on another set of economic theories. This is why theories trumpeted by Andrew Pusner and Elizabeth Warren are both right, and this is why it is absolutely essential that we have an informed Electorate.